guys. That's how they built that organization into the best organization in the 80s and 90s. And they're doing it again. I think Lynch is just taking a page out of John McVay and Bill Walsh's book, and the guy who works for CBS won 3 Super Bowls, and he works with CBS. NFC title game is in Santa Clara, not quite San Fran, and keep him in the dirt, but it's our friend Randy Cross. Randy, keep him in the dirt, baby.
Yeah, take him to the swamp.
Coldest time you could ever play a football game is in September in San Francisco at Candlestick Point. I mean, you freeze your baguettes off out there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and if you really hit it wrong, it's cold and it's high tide. So you're –
Absolutely. Randy, are you surprised that they're back in the NFC title game?
No. I mean, the things that had to break right have pretty much broken right. I mean, you got to have the injuries go the right way, and everybody knows that now. I mean, if it happens for you in that second half of the season where you don't lose your more valuable bodies, you're going to be right there. And the way that they're built, man, I mean, they can run the ball with CMC. They can throw it like crazy, obviously, with Purdy at quarterback. And they got a defense that, do they bend? Yeah, they don't break real often. And, you know, occasionally this year, especially in the second half, they've gotten touchdowns scored on them the first possession by offenses. And then the offense on the other team turns around and goes, oh, wait a minute. Have they scored the last 5 times he had the ball?
Yeah, right. I mean, they score in bunches, man. I mean, have you been surprised, Randy, with the play? Get this. I've never seen this. You flop on a guy you wasted 3 ones on, and you land on a guy that you all of a sudden, you look at his numbers. This guy's got numbers better than Montana. This guy's got numbers better. I get a different era, a whole different thing. The wide receivers being killed in the line of scrimmage. I get all that, but still, have you been surprised by his development?
Not really. You saw at the end of last year that got sort of obviously stunted by what happened in that NFC Championship game. But, you know, his recovery, how little have you heard about that? I mean, he had basically Tommy John surgery on his elbow. And he was back by the first regular season game. He's in camp. He's throwing the ball early. No, I'm not surprised. I mean, I think Kyle Shanahan has done a really masterful job with Brock Purdy as far as how he's taught him and the options he's given him. And watching him progress and read the field and watch those receivers adjust to him, it's been fun to watch. It really has. It's been something that's been, you know, as a former 49er, I guess I'm always a 49er, but as a former player for them, it's something that brings back a lot of good memories because, you know, I think he's got the potential to be that good a player. And despite that, there are idiots in that fan base that would take Trey Lance back right now. It's like, can you see that? The ball was wet. It wasn't coming out right. Get rid of him. I mean, it's like, give me a break, you idiots. It's insufferable, but it's not any more insufferable than your typical, you know, sort of sports-generated stuff these days that it's all based on takes. You got a hot take, you're good. You know, even if you're a fan, you got a hot take, you're good.
I'll tell you this, Randy. Trey Lance is not better than Colin Kaepernick. So to sit there and say you're better than that kid, that what that guy's doing right now, how about this little statistic for you that Bill Walsh would probably even love? He attempted the least amount of passes of any quarterback in the top 20 and finished second or third in passing yards. Shows you the effective and the efficiency of what they did with that quarterback and how good he was and effective he was. They threw the least amount of passes, and you're like third or second in total passing yards. That's amazing. Yeah. Does that offense and does Kyle kind of remind you a little bit of Bill?
A little bit of Bill. A lot more of his dad. a lot more of Mike, because of the running back emphasis and the
And Mike
movement.
was in San Fran, I believe.
Yeah.
He was in San Fran with Seifert.
Yeah, he was. And, the whole emphasis on movement in the offensive line, that reminds me a lot of Mike Shanahan. All the motion, all the formations. There's a little bit of Joe Gibbs in there. There's a little bit of Bill Walsh in there. There's very, very, still even today, even in an offense like this, there's very little new. And, everybody kind of cannibalizes old ideas. And I think as we currently see it, Kyle's doing the best job of that.
Think about what the team you're playing, and I got to hand it to Dan Campbell. I thought he was a WWE guy, and he was getting ready to, like, all of a sudden the kneecap shit and all that. And, Chris Bill was telling me, Sills, this guy's the real deal. And sure enough, Chris was right. This guy is the real deal. But do you know he's the winningest coach in the postseason in the Super Bowl era and all time in Detroit history for postseason wins? And they've been around for 1 billion years. Just to show you, they don't win up at that place.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that Lions team. I mean, It's been a remarkable turnaround. Look at all the hits that they're hitting with Brad Holmes, their general manager. It's been remarkable.
Yeah, they've done a fantastic job of drafting and making deals and getting talent. I mean, you look at, where do you want to go? You want to go Aiden Hutchinson? You want to go over there? You want to go Campbell at linebacker?
Penei Sewell?
You want to go to Penei Sewell, who's, that to me is one of the highlights of the game Sunday, is you get to watch two of the most dominant offensive tackles in the game that not only are big and fast, but they can scoot and they can move people. I mean, that's going to be great. But I mean, the Lions personnel, it's not quite as good as the Niners, I don't think. But I tell you, their hits have been gigantic, and they're probably 2 or 3 more of those away from being a dominant team. And there's not a fan base in the league that deserves this more. Maybe Cleveland, but I mean, Detroit, it's been since that 57 game when they came back at Kezar Stadium to beat the Niners.
That's right. It was the Niners at Kezar.
Yep.
That's right, man. That's correct. That's right. The Lions, last time they won a world championship was
81, in 81, Dan, we heard all about that stuff. All about it.
When you guys went to Detroit?
We went to the NFC Championship game against Dallas. We heard about all the times the Niners had failed against Dallas. We heard about the times the Niners had failed against Detroit. We heard the times the Niners had failed against Cleveland. I mean, it was crazy. But, yeah.
How many NFC title games did you play in, Randy?
4.
What one sticks out the most to you? Was it the catch in the back of the end zone with Clark?
To me, I've always been the catch, the ones that were positives, the 2 times we beat the Bears and the time we beat the Cowboys were pretty magical. The 83 team, I think, would have been a world champion if we'd have gotten out of RFK. And the whole thing with the officials and whatnot was a little dicey. But that game really stuck with me to this day. I mean, the 2 times we lost to the Giants in the playoffs, one time I was there, one time I wasn't. I mean, they literally physically beat us. They deserve that. And we lost in 87 to the Vikings in the divisional round. But of all the times I was in the championship game, is that game against the Skins that sort of stuck in my craw. Of course, if it hadn't stuck in all our craws, we probably wouldn't have been 18-1 the next year.
I'll make this point to you. Isn't it funny? The only things that you harp on are the losses. You don't really look at the wins anymore because you're like this, because that shows you how spoiled this guy is, folks, because he's had so many brilliant ones. Well, let me throw this at you. I've never asked you this one. The last drive with Montana of your career in Miami, or the first drive for the Super Bowl with the catch, what meant more to you in your career? Because again, it was the beginning and the end for you in your career of winning. Think about that. Again, folks, you got to understand that game in Detroit is still today the most watched game in Super Bowl history. And you had nobody but our great friend, Freddie Solomon, Cooper, Wendell Tyler. It wasn't Rice. It wasn't Taylor. It wasn't Craig. It wasn't any of those guys. It was just a cast of those guys that you guys had put together with McVay. There was that great game at Candlestick. Then you go and play Cincinnati. I think you beat them 27-21 or 28-21, something like that. It was a one-score game. And then that last drive with Montana taking you down the sidelines to win another Super Bowl. What do you think you look back on more fondly?
Well, it's kind of hard to badmouth, the opportunity.
Right. It's like talking about to your two kids, right?
It's hard to badmouth the ability to kind of ride off into the sunset, a Super Bowl champion, which is what happened after Super Bowl 23. But I think it was that first one against Dallas. Beating them. They had embarrassed us so bad for a couple of years in a row before that. They were so arrogant. It was very, very special. And it's worth remembering. We had a great point of reference because we had recently really sucked.
Yeah.
So going to a Super Bowl, 2 years before that, we were 2-14. The year before that, we were 6-10. Then we go 16-3, go to the Super Bowl and win it. And, I wouldn't say appropriately, but we might have over-celebrated that offseason. I'm not sure.
Hey, did it mean more beating? This is a crazy question because it's a Super Bowl ring. And actually, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was Summerall and Madden's first Super Bowl that they called in the booth for CBS at the time. Did you get more personal satisfaction in beating Dallas than you did in winning the Super Bowl against Cincinnati?
I don't think so. It's still the Super Bowl.
Can't.
No. But we had played Dallas earlier in the year and whipped their ass. And they insisted that we hadn't played the real Dallas. And we had played Cincinnati earlier in the year in Cincinnati and beaten them. So now getting the Super Bowl, making that halftime lead, it was 20-0 at halftime. So that we might have relaxed a little bit in the second half, and thank God for the goal line stand and everything else. But yeah, I'd say it was still the Super Bowl. I'd have to go with that.
Randy, it's coming back to me now because when I was on KMBR in the Bay Area, I used to get Bill Walsh on. I think Bill may have been at Stanford at the end there a little bit because he gave me his book. I got a signed copy of his book. And I asked him in that first Super Bowl year what his fondest memory was. You know what he said? And I hadn't thought about it, and I didn't know the history of it. He goes, "What do you think it was?" I go, "Well, it has to be winning that game." And he goes, "We played Cincinnati in a regular season. And going back to Cincinnati and beating Paul Brown's Bengals when Paul Brown was doing everything he could to undermine me on getting jobs in the NFL. It came out, Mr. Bartolo had told him there was a Green Bay job. The Charger job was open. The Ram job was open. And Paul Brown, people don't know this story, and I hope I'm not saying something out of school here, but he said, I go, so Paul Brown was undermining. He goes, Mr. Bartolo told me the story too, that Paul Brown was undermining Bill because he didn't want Bill to get all the credit for that team back in the day in Cincinnati when Paul was the head coach, and that he would undermine him getting these jobs. And he recommended to DeBartolo not to hire him. And then he goes, no, I'm going to hire him. Then he went to the Blue Bonnet Bowl, and they found some of these guys and all this stuff. And I went back and did the history, and then Mr. DeBartolo told me story. But so it had to be a little bit more of that too, because many people don't know that story. So beating the Bengals in the Super Bowl probably meant a lot to you guys because it was for Bill Walsh, because Bill had been passed over for that job that he was promised.
Oh, yeah. He would never publicly say much about that. You wouldn't hear it in a press conference. You wouldn't. He'd have a few choice words behind closed doors about that situation. He'd take some veiled cracks at him. He'd look. We'd be at practice the week of the Super Bowl. We had the early practice date, and the Bengals practiced late, and we both practiced at the Dome. So we're in a practice, and we're playing music. We're playing air guitars behind the defense and doing all this stuff. And Bill start laughing and he's kind of shadow boxing. He looks around, he turns, he goes, "Hey, look." You look down at the other end zone, and the Bengals are standing in the tunnel, got their helmets clicked up. They've got, and they're sitting there with Forrest Gregg like, "We're ready to go." That's for practice. Bill's going, "Ooh, that looks bad, doesn't it?"
Didn't they pass for? Hey, so Bill said this, that Paul Brown called him in, and I think they went with Blanton Collier or somebody like that.
Bill Johnson.
Bill Johnson, that's it. And
Bill
he said to him, "I don't think you have the temperament to be a head football coach in the NFL." And that stuck with Bill.
Oh, yeah.
His entire coaching career, that he didn't have the temperament, until Kevin Fagan told me a story about you guys when you guys would practice. And I'm going to get a little raunchy here, guys. So Bill would go like this, and he would go to like McKintrick, or he'd go to all those position coaches. "You can't get these guys going. You son of a..." He would get in all of their assistant coaches, and it empowered you guys to go, "Shit, man. I don't want my assistant coaches to get shit on like that by Bill Walsh." He never really killed you guys, but he would kill the assistant coaches. I thought it was a slick way of coaching you guys.
Yeah, it was pretty good. He'd jump on Bob McKittrick, or he'd jump on Hackett, or he'd jump on Milt Jackson, or he was an equal opportunity dogger. But it worked. He'd rarely get after us. When he got after you, you knew damn well you deserved it.
Absolutely. Randy, couple questions, if I may, on the AFC. Mm-hmm. Mahomes, I've bet against this guy too much now, man. I'm starting to do the shit that I did with Brady. And I'm going like, how can you go against Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, right? And so just your take, couple questions here on this, if you can. How do you see that game playing out, AFC title game?
Baltimore looks like they're kind of that team. And they have since they just butt whipped San Francisco. It's been like, ooh, that looks familiar. I've seen Baltimore on that kind of roll. And they look like they're back on that kind of roll. I love Kansas City. I think they've got a lot of stuff going for them. They may be down an all-pro guard. I just don't see Mahomes pulling any of that Mahomes magic, not in Baltimore against that defense, having to keep pace with what can be done on the other side with Lamar.
49ers, Ravens again. This time, I think the 49ers win it. And back to you, lowlifes, winning all those damn games and Super Bowls and going to Hawaii.
They finally get number 6. It's been a while.
By the way, tell everyone you're 3-0, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's like Jordan. I'm 6-0. Cross is 3-0. We don't lose Super Bowls. And I tell folks this too, Randy. Joe Montana threw 14 touchdowns in Super Bowl play, never threw a pick, had 135 quarterback rating. Mm-hmm. That's how you win those games. Randy, thank you, my friend.
Anytime. Enjoy the games this weekend. It's going to be fantastic.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to my good friend, College Football Hall of Famer. He also works at CBS Sports. We really appreciate him coming aboard. That should be a great game this weekend. All right, guys, do me a favor. Hit the like button. Keep it here, National Football Show.
Football and Hooters, the perfect